Welcome. Emotions are everywhere. So how can we be smarter with our feelings? The answer is emotional intelligence, or EQ. We're delighted you're watching, because at 6 seconds, we're working towards 1 billion people practicing the skills of emotional intelligence. Can we count you in? Here on 6 Seconds channel, you'll find practical skills for work and life, inspiration for today, and support to build a better future for all.
Hey everyone. Hey Josh.
Hey Tom.
I'm excited to talk about emotion more in depth today and in a more interactive way. What are you excited about today's specific format?
Well, I was just thinking emozioni.
Ah,
Get multilingual here. We actually
like
have
that.
some global perspectives on emotion, and really just kind of digging in. Plus, we get to share a brand new thing. We showed it when we were just on a minute ago, and one of our panelists said, "Wow, that's cool!" So I'm excited about that.
Very exciting, yeah. And I like this format that we're gonna have today. Maybe we can explain a little bit how it works. It's gonna be an Ask Me Anything type of episode. So people in the chat on Facebook and YouTube, feel free to ask us questions, because we're gonna basically today is gonna be all about answering all the questions you've ever had on emotions. Maybe not all the questions, most of them. But yeah, feel free to ask them. We've been collecting them on social media for a couple of weeks, so we already have some questions that we're gonna try to ask. But yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them.
I am so uncool that I didn't know there was such a thing as an AMA show. But apparently, for those of you who are like me, apparently this is a thing. You do an Ask Me Anything. So this is celebrity tell-all, except it's about emotions.
Exactly.
So we have a couple of awesome panelists to join us today. Hello, Fio, and hello, Serene.
Hi.
And between the three of you, we have like 8 languages or something, so we can get some really interesting perspectives on emotions across cultures. So Tom, what do we do?
Well, I would say let's start with a basic question that we can use to introduce each other and kind of start a conversation off. Maybe we could talk about what is one fascinating thing that you've seen in your experience working with emotions that you would like to share to get us warmed up, and tell us a little bit about yourself as well. Theo, you want to start? And then
Sure, why not? Well, good morning, everyone, and very happy to be here. About emotions, I have to say that's been a rocky road, and I was always good at naming and getting the embodied sense of the emotions. But I realized that I will get drowned in emotions. So I know emotions can be super heavy, super overwhelming. And so that was a challenge to incorporate emotional intelligence. And it really changed my life in the way I will deal with my emotions and my feelings. And I know I can produce certain feelings, I can cultivate certain states, and that was being really, really helpful for me. Yeah.
I really relate to that, Fio. First of all, I just can't help it. But, you know, when I start thinking about emotions and feelings, that song, Feelings, Nothing More Than Feelings, like jumps in my head. I try to fight that impulse. But I, like you, I found emotions to be something very confusing and overwhelming. And I just thought, if I just try to ignore this, everything will be better. But that didn't kind of work. And so that led me into this road of wanting to understand them. And actually, there's some things that really have surprised me. Like, you know how a lot of people say, nobody can make you feel anything. It's not true. Or like, because we're social animals. Or sometimes people will say, emotions are not logical. And that's not true either. So those are some things that have been fascinating to me.
Serene, you want to go?
Yeah, actually, when growing up and not talking about emotions in a very open way, made me always like question what's happening inside of me, and why am I feeling that, and is it allowed actually to express that and taking it into consideration. And as Joshua was saying, I was fascinated that emotions are logical and are really there, and we should pay attention to them. And actually, when I started my journey with emotional intelligence, I was fascinated that there is a science behind all of this. And how can we be emotionally smart or emotionally stupid? So it's really paved the way to me to know myself more, to actually acknowledge my emotions and taking them into consideration while making decisions.
Tom, I thought maybe we should say hello to some people who are joining from around the world. It's great to see people coming from all over the place, and or the internet as a place. So thank you. And I think that we could all use a love coach. So I'm glad you're here. And one of the things I love about this work that we do at 6 Seconds is the global perspectives. And Adi, hello, good to see you again. Many, many, many years ago, we first met in Indonesia. And from Peru and from California and Miami and more. So
I guess I'll go, and then we can move to another question, if that's okay. I think for me, something fascinating about emotions is that a lot of people think of them as something that is regardless of what you do. Like, emotions happen. And before I started working on emotional intelligence, I wasn't familiar with the idea that we actually have a lot of power, and we can change, we can shift, we can navigate, as we say in 6 Seconds, our emotional state. And I think a lot of people are confused by that, and by the fact that, you know, emotions just happen to us, and we just have to deal with it.
Yeah. It is an interesting paradox because emotions are automatic, but it's like we're setting up the programming in which that automatic routine will run. And so it's an automatic, emotions are an automatic physiological response to stimulus inside us or outside us to help us adapt to our environment. That automatic, when we say automatic, it doesn't mean that there's none of our own volition or will involved. We have set up the conditions, and our cultures have set up the conditions.
Definitely. And I think this is a great segue to the question that I saw on chat, that we like to talk about this. And we had an episode that you should check out, Gabriela, where we break down emotions, feelings, and moods, and some of the differences, but maybe we can just quickly have a round on this one. Who wants to go first?
Well, one phrase that's interesting is in emotions, researchers use the phrase cognitively saturated. How cognitively saturated is it? And in other words, like, is this sort of pure emotion as a neurobiological response? Is this immediate chemical? It's not exactly immediate. There's a little delay. Or is it coming later, mixed in with more thought? So that's a clue to it. Someone else?
I think that in the basic emotions, these emotions that have evolved for our survival, it's kind of easier to distinguish what is it composed of. But as you go and you mix these emotions with another emotions and thoughts and perhaps beliefs and values, they become feelings, and these feelings becomes states of being. And that's what sometimes we see someone that is overly emotional, and that person is not necessarily acting on a more coordinated or coherent way, but we see it's emotional. So there's a lot of this, and there's a lot of richness there. And some people confuse this basic thing, which is the emotion itself, is very short term, with the feeling, that you can actually work on the feeling and you can perpetuate that feeling, or you can actually work it out and transform it. So that's a lot of richness in this, just in knowing this difference.
Instead of answering, follow-up question. That's okay. Do you think that, so the emotion, Josh, you were saying that kind of happens, like we start feeling it, and it's kind of automatic in a way. There's a little delay, but we feel angry, right? But when is it that we have a choice? Is it between the feeling and the emotion, or is it when it's already a feeling? Serene, I don't know if you want to go.
Yeah, no, I wanted to say also, Tom, that emotion is energy in motion. So when we think about our bodies and this energy that's going on, and then maybe we can interpret what feeling do we have. You know, sometimes our stomach aches, sometimes our jaws are really tight. So once it's also going on in the physical body, and then we can actually, as Theo said, we can divert it and see what is the best action or reaction to such a thing.
So you bring up an important point about the word feel. And I don't know how it is in Arabic and Spanish and Italian and other languages that you all speak. In English, of course, when we say feel, we can say, I feel the temperature of my teacup. I feel worried. And we use the same word for literally sensory feeling and emotional experience. We feel our feelings. They're literally something we can physically feel them. And that's because what's happening is these chemicals are going and they're affecting every living cell in the human body. And as these chemicals are going and affecting our cells, they're changing really almost everything. They change our heartbeat and the frequency of our heartbeat. They change the way our blood flows. They change the way our cells are absorbing. They change the way our muscles contract. They change our digestion. They change our reproduction. They change our immunity. They change our thinking. Like all these different things are changed by these emotion chemicals. And so then we can physically feel, oh, something's happening here.
Maybe, Joshua, because we weren't actually aware of actually feeling our bodies, you know, as you said, the temperature or the heartbeat or whatever it is, we were not, let's say, we did not learn how to look at our bodies and actually see when the emotion starts to build up before we actually burst into whatever reaction we are having. So sometimes when we start to notice our bodies, as you said, we can actually catch the feeling in the very, very, very beginning of it.
Yeah, and that's a great point, Serene. I think that in the years to come, and now people are paying more attention on how they embody their feelings and their emotions, and knowing that sometimes we ask some people, how do you feel? And that's not really effective because they don't know. They don't know what they don't know, but they can sort of sense in their body how they're feeling. So that source of wisdom is something that we're really losing as a civilization. And we need to really go back and say, hey, the messages from my body are important. And sometimes I might not have the language to express it, but I know my body. And my body is a source of intuition and wisdom.
I confess that I actually find it a little annoying when somebody says, you know, hey, how are you feeling? And I'm like, okay, first of all, I'm not feeling one thing. And second of all, do you really want to know?
How much time you got?
Yeah, right. Like, did you want the 10-second? Fine, good. Or were you actually asking? You know, it's.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's also kind of a cultural question. Like it's a specific. I think it's something that happens a lot in the U.S. as almost like as you were saying, it's something that. I don't know. It's a common question here in the U.S., but I feel like if I think back living in Italy, I don't think we ask the same question as a you know, what's going on. You know, it's a pretty complicated, deep question to ask.
Well, then it trivializes the complexity and depth by trying to like give me one word. Mm-hmm. I just wanted to go back to somebody in the chat was saying, maybe you can find it, Tom.
Yeah.
They said, so are you saying like the feeling in the pit of my stomach is anxiety? It's not exactly. It's probably anxiety is made up of fear and anticipation as two basic emotions. And anxiety is connected with, we just shot a whole video about this, so I've just been researching more about anxiety. Anxiety is connected with an internal stress response. So when we talk about stressors, they're usually external. Anxiety has to do with an internal stress response. And anxiety itself is a feeling. One of the physiological effects of anxiety is that feeling in your stomach. And sometimes people talk about the term somatization, or a somatic response to emotion. So one of the somatic experiences of anxiety is that feeling in your stomach. And in fact, for people who suffer from anxiety disorders, it's very frequently they have digestive challenges. And this is connected to the function of cortisol, which is a little bit technical. We get into that in the video. But that's an example where we have a somatic or physical feeling, which is connected to this word we call feeling, which is connected to the basic emotions that were created that are triggering us.
I have a question that's kind of related to that we collected over the last couple of weeks. What does it mean when we refer to people or to ourselves as being sensitive?
It depends on the tone of voice. Why are you so sensitive, Theo?
Yeah.
As opposed to, wow, you're so sensitive. It's an interesting word.
Yeah. It can be used as I think as a token word for many things. It's kind of those words that you can use as a sword, or just as you just said, oh, you're so sensitive, and words are powerful. But I think what's laying behind it's the fact that you are good at distinguish this, or you are, showing me some layer of feelings, or you're displaying emotion. So I wouldn't take it in the wrong necessarily, even if it's said like, oh, you're so sensitive, because it's telling me that I can at least, see some difference between one and the other, but yeah, it's useful.
But actually, Theo, if it's said like you're so sensitive, I think they're building this on the reactions or the impulses that you have towards, let's say, any word or any situation or a circumstance that you go through, and you're always reacting in only emotional part, not as we say, blending thinking and feeling. It's only upon feelings, and that's where we go into the reactive mode rather than actually thinking about it and properly put the action in place.
True.
So sometimes it's built on that.
We all have known someone that we know very sensitive, kind of drama into the drama side, very, very artistic. And we say, oh, well, that's eccentric, but what it means is might be living in the reaction cycle all the time.
Well, right, but it also might be connected to a bias. And somebody asked a question in the chat a few minutes ago about business. And it's interesting how much bias we have about emotion and how pervasive that is. And I don't know, in different cultures, I'm curious about this, but certainly in North America and Europe, we have these false dichotomies, right? Like emotion versus rational, personal versus business. Like the idea that your business is not made of people,
Mm-hmm.
And that like your customers aren't people, and that your employees aren't people, and that your owners aren't people. And like, let's separate that. And that separation, I think, has a profoundly destructive effect on our beings, but also on our integrity and the way that we think about business's role in society as somehow separate from life. That's very dangerous.
Yeah, it's almost like when we talk about this difference between business and personal life, is we're talking about decision making. We're talking about how do you make decisions, right? And there is this false concept of if you have to make a very important strategic decision, you have to be focused and look at all the data, and emotions can just like cloud your thinking, right? Which I think that's the main point that we can use to explain how this actually doesn't work that way. It's important to keep a balance, I think, between thinking and emotions, especially making important decisions. Because also being all on the emotional side, I don't think it's good either.
Sorry. No, I just want to say that most of our rational decisions are basically emotional.
Serena, I'm curious about in Arabic and the cultural context in where you live. And I know there's not one Arabic culture. There's many, but in Arabic language, what is how? I mean, for example, in Spanish, Fio, I believe emotion is a feminine word. And in Italian as well, I think. What about in Arabic? What kind of bias is there in the language about emotion?
The same thing, Josh, because actually expressing emotions are usually perceived as weak. So if you talk about your emotions or you're being the good, sensitive, human being, you're actually perceived as weak. So we don't talk about emotions. Nowadays, it's more likely that people are more aware that this component is really important and we should address it. But throughout the years and the culture, it's not very acceptable.
I'm super curious about what like ancient holy books say about emotion. Like, do they say, does the Quran or the Old Testament or the Bible say, or the Vedas, what do they say? We have to do another show about that, Tom.
the history of emotions.
Yeah, we should actually do that research.
Yeah, I think that at least for some of the sacred books, they've been influenced by the Greeks. I mean, let's blame the Greeks because they came out with this notion that emotions were weaker somehow. Remember with the Greek gods display some kind of emotion, destructive emotion, they were termed as weak. That was they feeble. They're not doing something right. So I think we inherit that in the culture, and it permeated all cultures. Because in Spanish it's the same. I mean, the different countries, when you evidence some emotion, you're weak, you're vulnerable, and it's not looked in a favor. Even in the dictionary, the Real Academy, I mean, the definition for vulnerable is not something you want to say, oh, okay, I want to identify with this. It's like,
That's why
Fia, and also because when years are going by and the industrial phase got up, they didn't need people with emotions. They needed robots. Get the job done. This is what you have to do, and so on. So people actually did not deal with emotions as on the table because actually they don't need it. Push it aside and just do what you have to do, and let's get done with this thing. So it benefited some layers and the workers, and I think this is why we are here now, to spread that emotions are there and it's really valid and logical, and it plays a big role on how we behave and what we think and how we show up in the world.
So there's this kind of mechanistic worldview.
Yep.
In this mechanistic worldview, people are widgets and they perform roles, and we have human resources, and we have command and control structures that are going to make sure they're obedient. And does the name Pavlov ring a bell, right? And people are just fundamentally motivated by carrots and sticks, and that's it. And that mechanistic worldview has dominated business. It's dominated Western societies for hundreds of years. I think what you're saying, Serene, is that right now we're seeing that mechanistic worldview is not actually serving us very well. It's not making us happier. It's not increasing well-being. It's also not increasing prosperity. And businesses that are stuck in that worldview are suffering because they can't innovate, they can't engage people, they can't work across boundaries, they can't influence. And so, leave emotions out of it. And now we don't have wonder, joy, excitement, surprise, curiosity, passion. Good, we've left emotions out.
And it's a lot about also how the leadership models I shouldn't use the word leadership, but the CEO and the top management of a company models emotions and makes it acceptable or encouraged. And as Phil was saying, it's like it really shifts the culture of the organization, where then you can be vulnerable, and it might be seen as a good thing, or it might be seen as a bad thing based on the culture of the organization.
This is another fascinating topic. And actually, Peter Salovey, who's the president of Yale University and one of the scientists who really developed the understanding of what emotional intelligence really means, he actually did some research on investment and how people think about money and emotions. Money is all emotions. And even like Keynesian economic theory, Keynes said the animal spirits of the economy, in other words, emotions, are what drive the stock market. And it's amazing.
We have a couple of comments here in the chat about that topic of culture and business and personal life. And then I saw a really interesting question that might be good to jump into. It's a tricky one.
Yeah.
What happens when we get kind of stuck in an emotion that's not serving us, especially when we have a task, that maybe we don't like, or something that's triggering us in a way? What can we do to shift away?
And part of emotional intelligence is figuring out what to express, when, how, in a way that's going to help you get the results you're looking for, right? It's not, emotional intelligence doesn't mean express all your feelings. It means be smart with your feelings.
Yeah, and I noticed that she writes lack of emotions, and there's always emotions. And I mean, going from there, it's kind of first identifying what do I mean by lack of what would I like to have, as opposed to what I'm feeling right now. And there's always a point in identifying first, what are you feeling? And
you've all heard me talk about that. I think the metaphor of the river, and if there's too much water in the river, we have a problem. If there's too little water in the river, we have a problem. So she says lack of emotions management. So I imagine, Melissa, you can clarify for us, but I imagine what you're talking about is too much water in the river. So Serene, what do you think?
Well, I think to this question and back to Tom, when we are stuck and we don't have really time to reflect and go into what happened and so on, maybe we can leave it till another time. It's no pressure. But sometimes what I found useful for me, that sometimes the emotion change emotion. So if you change your physicality, you have a time out, and then you will rewire into this calmer place where you can come up with, let's say you're working, some mentioned something about I'm working on something and I'm stuck in a negative or unpleasant emotion. So what I usually do, I take my time out of whatever I'm doing. I try to change my mindset. So it's either thoughts or actually physical things that you can do. You can feel a slight difference when you can think clearer, and then maybe you can have your time out later in the day to reflect what's happening and what this feeling is trying to tell you, and with the wisdom and so on. But sometimes when we are in work and with a lot of pressure, with deadlines or, employees and all the things around us, we don't have this time to dig inside, but just take a time out and just try to relax and breathe, because we forget about the breathing part. And actually breathing literally takes us into another, it shifts whatever emotions we're having to a more calmer place where we can see things more differently or clearer.
And Melissa was saying, that phrase that we actually hear a lot, right? I'm too emotional. And what do you say to that? Is there such a thing as being too emotional?
Well, I have a kind of yes, but I have a kind of contrary view about this, which is I think a lot of the times when people are having trouble with over expressing feelings or over feeling feelings, it's because they've been trying to repress or suppress or hide them. So what happens is, as we have this stimulus going on or this perception going on, the emotion starts out very small. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger if we don't change or the stimulus doesn't change. And so then, we walk in the room and we're like, I'm not going to tell them I'm mad. I'm going to be calm. I'm going to be calm. All right, what's going on here? I'm being calm. Like, people are like, whoa, what's wrong with you? Like, nothing. I'm not mad. And it's like this. There's this disconnect because we think we're like amazing actors, and most of us are not. And so I think for many people, when you are experiencing that, like, oh, I'm being too emotional or emotions are too big for me, actually, maybe what you've done is suppressed or hidden or pushed away those emotions for a while, and you weren't dealing with them when they were small. Is that possible?
Yeah, we have a lot of good comments on this too. Techniques and things to do when we find ourselves in that situation. Navigating emotion and consequential thinking as a way of shifting. 6 seconds pause.
Yeah, increasing also, I think that increasing your idea of your intrinsic motivation. Why are you doing things? And to me, when I came to 6 seconds, like I said, I was very high on knowing what I felt, and bigger is better. So I was like, oh, always, like being hacked into these emotions. I was hijacked all the time. But then as I start learning the other steps in the model and the choose yourself, it allowed me to really channel my energy, that emotional energy, into something that I wanted to produce with the give yourself. So when I align all those things, I stop being over emotional. And even in my facial expression, in the tone of my voice, in the words that I will choose, people will notice the difference after a while. Like when I get together with my friends from school, they're like, I mean, you're different. You sound different, you feel different. So that's great for me.
We have a couple comments here on emotional hijack.
Yeah, so the term emotional hijack, for those who are not familiar with it, Joe Ledoux talked about the back alley between our amygdala and our thalamus. And what happens is when we get into a highly escalated state and our adrenal system becomes activated, we move into fight, flight, or freeze. Our amygdalas are highly activated, and our amygdala is recruiting other brain areas to say, danger, danger, fix it, solve something fast. And in that crisis mode, what happens is all these other brain areas become recruited into the fight, flight, freeze reaction. And that term, Dan Goleman talked about this as an emotional hijack. It's like all of your brain resources are now being, involved in this crisis mode. And it's one of the reasons why we do stupid things with our emotions. And by the way, I'm not saying like we don't do that, because I certainly have said and done things where later I'm like, wow, I did not handle that well.
Josh, what helped me a lot is like we always have like these positive feelings and negative feelings. When we talk about feelings and we don't look at positive and negative, and they're just messengers to tell us something, that really helped me on a personal level, because now I have the chance to look at it with curiosity. So what message is it telling me? How would I go around it? And going around the idea without being so attached to this emotion as you don't have to feel that, because this is what we were taught. You don't have to be angry. You don't have. This is you are absolutely fine. Don't say this. Don't do that. And don't feel. So when actually I realized that I have the right to feel this feeling, maybe I don't have the right to act this way, it really made a difference. And looking at feelings like not positive or negative, but actually they're valid and they're there. So what's behind that? So I think looking at different feelings with curiosity might help a lot of people, like it helped me.
I don't know where I read this, but way back when we got started learning about, and I started learning about emotions. This is probably in 1997. I read an article which said, when you look at clouds going by and you see, there's a dragon, there's a bird, there's a fish, we're not reacting to that. We're just noticing that. And what if we could look at our emotions in that way? Like, oh, there's an anger going by, there's a jealousy going by, there's a fear going by, and just kind of stepping back from the experience and naming it and observing it. I think, Serene, what you just said is profoundly important, because when we get into this debate, I shouldn't feel this is bad, blah, 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 blah. Actually, what we're doing is we're adding energy, we're adding fuel into this, and things just get more confusing.
Mm-hmm. And I wonder, we're talking about anger, right? And I wonder how our history of dealing with anger influences the when we feel anger in the moment, right? So something triggers us, and then we react because of all times in the past that we felt angry, and we reinforce that pattern.
Or the people we have learned from, and we've seen the way that they express anger and what happens next. And the cultural messages, oh, well, don't, you're supposed to be nice, or you're supposed to be good, or you're supposed to be whatever. And then we get into this very complicated, it's just become so messy. And it's like, where are we in this? And somebody mentioned this earlier about what story you're telling yourself. Is this even your feeling? Is this the feeling that is this even the feeling that's going on for you? Because maybe you're just caught up in the kind of cultural norms of it. And that stepping back piece, that's why that's been so helpful for me.
I think, Joshua, also the cultural and, as parents, we always want to, save our children from feeling big emotions. So we grow up in a house that really, we don't see like a good navigating through emotions, because we only see the end results, that parents are like trying to protect us, like even us as parents, we try to protect our children from feeling this and feeling that, and maybe fight their battles at some times. And I think all of this like brings us to this adult that can't really manage well their emotions, because we were not actually taught how to. So instead of protecting our children, maybe actually we can look at it that this is life, as you said, it's a cloud, it's coming. So maybe dealing with it and trying to navigate around it and seeing what our options do we have, it makes more sense than leaving them to the world, and then they would feel, that guilt and shame and anger and jealousy and not know what to do about that.
I was also thinking about a couple of weeks ago, we were talking about racism and emotions, and how these cultural rules are they're not neutral. These cultural rules are connected with power. And the fact that it's in most cultures, not all, but in most cultures, it's generally more culturally accepted for men to display anger and women to display sorrow. That's not by accident. That's not a neutral idea. The idea that, the stereotype that, Black men are angry and therefore dangerous, that's not neutral. That's a very loaded bias. And a couple weeks ago on the show, I said, in some ways, emotional expression is a form of privilege. I wonder if it's also a form of resistance. And for example, for Serene and Theo, I wonder if for you, like choosing to stand firm in emotion is a form of feminism.
Mm-hmm.
Have you thought about it that way?
Yeah, I think that like in Latin culture, which is very diverse, but they have some commonalities. And this is idea of the women should smile, and people will tell you, oh, why you're not smiling? Like, I'm sure you guys don't get that. I mean, why you're not smiling, Josh? It's like, why you're not doing...
I got the opposite, Theo. Why
right, right.
Literally.
So and then when you look at this in a cultural context or power-based context, it's like you're supposed to smile, to be agreeable, to be nice, and all these roles. And I think that the way we're rebelling now as women, it's professionally. We're setting new boundaries, we're setting new rules, and we're opening a conversation that is uncomfortable for everyone. Because I think that for this system to be sustained, we also need to change and to open the dialogue for other women. This is so automatic. This pattern is so embedded in our structure, our mental structures, that we don't even put it out there. So there is this conversation nowadays in feminism about, well, to be really stepping really into feminist, we have to get rid of courtesy. How to guys open the door for you and all that. And some of us, and I subscribe to this idea, I will be able to, I mean, I'm really ready to get rid of that too, if that is going to sustain a real change for women. I don't need anyone to open my door.
Serene, what do you think about Gerald's question?
How do we unlearn all the emotional patterns that our culture has taught us? Well, actually, as Theo was saying, first step to acknowledge that this pattern is not serving us anymore. And maybe by acknowledging it and looking at the layers and the options that we have, I think at some point we have to stand up and say something about it, to actually see what serves us now. Pia, your example is really nice. I'm not sure if in our side of the planet it's really acceptable, but the feminine energy and whatever you bring out definitely has to do also with how we express emotions and what we do about it. So maybe to unlearn a pattern, we have to start a new one and actually continue on doing it until it becomes our new pattern.
That's important. In our book, Inside Change, I was researching about how the brain learns and how change happens. And we don't unlearn things. This is another one of those great myths. We actually layer new learning on top of the old learning. And the old learning often has more deep neural interconnectedness. And so it's like we have this map that's written in very dark ink. And then we put this sort of thin tracing paper on top of it, and we've started to pencil in a new route. But the old one is really visible. And so when we're stressed, the old one becomes what we tend to go back to. And so as somebody said in the chat, practice. Annabelle Jensen, our president, talks about this all the time, that practice, and then practice. And practice requires intentionality, and practice requires effort. One of the things that she points out that I think is really important for all of us is, like, I spent 40 some years learning one of my patterns that I've been trying to change. And now I've been spent, 10 years trying to change it. And sometimes I'm frustrated that I haven't totally changed it. And just remembering, well, you practiced that one for 40 some years. You got great at it.
True, but as you said, Josh, I think the first step is like noticing it, because sometimes when we're stressed, we miss on really important stuff that we want to work with in ourselves, in our self-awareness and self-development, because we know we have to do it, but yet when things are complicated or are not stable, we don't see that pattern, or we're blinded, as we said, emotional hijacking or other things, but we're blinded. So I think observing, if we just try to learn how to observe ourselves in such situations, that would give us space to actually do something about it.
And that goes back to the business world conversation, right? When we say, leave emotions out, what we do there, we're focusing on something. And what we say often in 6 seconds is that when you focus on something, you're ignoring something else, right? And so you're maybe not noticing important things that are happening.
We're gonna have to do another show on this, because there's so many interesting questions. I appreciate this one, Karma, and this question is fascinating. And Theo, I think for both of you, in the cultural context where you come from, this is a very complicated question, Serene and Theo.
And this gets even more complicated when you add the variable of age. So as you age, you're not supposed to be so agreeable. So you become honestly, and you're supposed to become like an authority figure, right? A different kind of figure. And you are becoming invisible too, in a way. So it's this transition between being agreeable and being there as an ornament to become there to be more as an authority figure and a little bit less visible in public life. And we also are breaking these barriers, because more women over 50 are participating, are being very vocal in the discussion, and are opening the dialogue. So that's also something that is changing. And to go back to Josh and that pattern that is hard to change, I think, not to be overly optimistic, but I think that we can really be very effective in 10 years and changing 40-year-old patterns, because there's volition in this.
Yes.
When we learn patterns, when we're children, I mean, that's unintentional for us. We're just copying. But then when we include this wheel that is sometimes so overlooked, and we have an amazing wheel to change and to change the world and to shape our brains. And I think that's our great power.
Well, Tom, we should probably show this really cool new thing.
Yeah, let's start with this question, and then have this question in mind when we look at the thing we want to unveil today.
Yeah, so the Plutchik model is one of many models of emotions, and we like the Plutchik model for a variety of reasons. We've talked about that in some of our other videos. Maybe somebody can drop a link in the chat or in the comments to the Plutchik video. But Plutchik described 8 basic emotions that are connected to survival response. Basically, what animals, including human animals, display as part of just functioning in the world to survive. And shame, in the Plutchik model, would be a feeling that's because there are 8 basic emotions, and those basic emotions are like a paint palette that we can combine and recombine into thousands of different colors. And shame is an interesting one. It's a very powerful and very widespread emotion in many cultures. It's an emotion. It's part of what emotions researchers sometimes describe as a moral emotion: guilt, shame, remorse. But shame is often connected with anger. Ayman Sawaf, one of our board members, says that shame is anger turned inward. So anger means that there's a barrier or an obstacle that we're perceiving and we want to break through it. And if we think we're the obstacle, then we turn that anger inward. And it probably has some amount of disgust in it. Disgust is a feeling that means the rules are violated. And if we think we're violating the rules and doing wrong, there's definitely a power dynamic to shame, though. And I did some research on shame, looking at the difference between shame and guilt. And shame seems to imply that somebody is telling you you're bad, you're wrong. And it's not necessarily connected with your intrinsic motivation. So anticipation is connected with intrinsic motivation. And in a second, we can look at the Plutchik model and we can see what's the opposite of anticipation. And there's something interesting there. So let's see. I think if we press this button and then we press this button, I can share our cool new interactive emotion wheel. And Sean Foley and John Dodds and Tom worked on this. Thank you, guys. It's super cool. So, Serene, which one should I click? It says click anywhere to learn about your emotions. Where should I click?
How about trust?
Trust. You can see that all these are clickable. All right, trust. Similar words: accepting, safe. Typical sensations: warm. What's it telling you? This is safe. How can trust help you? Be open, connect, build alliance. And then we can go to a higher intensity feeling or lower intensity feeling, or we can go to the opposite feeling. Where do we want to go?
The opposite feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Disgust. Rejecting, rejected. Typical sensations: bitter and unwanted. Like I can taste that feeling.
Mm-hmm.
What's it telling you? Something's wrong. Rules are violated. How can it help you? Notice something unsafe or wrong.
Wow.
What do you think, Fio? What do you want to look at?
It's amazing. I like to look at fear.
Fear. Okay.
Right.
Agitated.
Stress, scared.
Something I care about is at risk.
Yeah. Now thinking about all these times where we are really experiencing fear and apprehension. I mean, I think it modulates between those two. Can relax, yeah.
I think our next version of this, we have to be able to click one and combine it with another and see what happens. That would be,
yeah, we will have the little ones in between the flower petals too that are very interesting. That we don't have them yet, but next version.
Definitely.
And I love the fact that it takes you to an article where you can read more.
Yeah.
Mm.
So I think, uncertainty, the feeling, the state that the world seems to be in, is got like apprehension, and I think the opposite of anticipation. Sometimes it's easier for me to think about, well, it's definitely not anticipation, or I don't know, maybe it is. Maybe it's like we're looking ahead. There's some annoyance.
Mm.
There's definitely not serenity. So maybe there's sadness, sense of loss.
Yeah. And Josh, I wonder how time influences this when you think about time.
They become, well, so here's the model, right? And at the top is that immediate. And then as we move down, they become more cognitively saturated, more similar to each other, more to the tips.
Mm.
And we have a question that we collected over the weeks about colors and emotion, and I think this is a great display and a great segue to that question. What do you think? Why are those colors shown here with those emotions?
Huh. Well, I mean, one answer is because there was a graphic artist who put this together for American scientists. But it is a really interesting question. Do those colors, let me go back to it. There's just thinking about cross-culturally too, so for all of you in, these colors, there's something that like really makes sense to me about anger as red, joy as yellow, that really makes sense. Sadness as blue, that really makes sense. This one doesn't. These aren't how I would maybe color these, but
we have a really fun activity on this, one of our certifications, right, Josh, where we get to mix colors and create and talk, describing an emotion.
I love that. That's in the advanced facilitator course.
Let's see. We have a few more minutes. Let's talk about maybe one question to like kind of try to wrap up today's discussion. I don't know how it goes so fast every time, but.
Well, and I just wanted to say for all of you who are here in chat, thank you for participating and asking good questions. And after the show, you're able to add comments. So, in 8 minutes when we end, if you add comments down below about what you'd like us to do another session about another question that you want us to answer, we read all of the questions that are in the comments and we go back and we answer them. So please come back and tell us what to do more about this topic, because there's so many more questions.
Okay, after a long time examining the question, I think this is examining the question. This is an interesting one that we could use. What do you think? What does it mean to struggle with it, even, right? What does it mean to struggle with an emotion? Maybe we can start there. It's about expressing it, or?
Well, I can speak for myself, actually. Like, one of the emotions that I struggle with is excitement. And what happens for me is I am pretty optimistic, and I get, or I have a pattern of optimism. I prefer it not as a judgment, but or not as a label, but something I use a lot of optimism. And something that comes up frequently for me is that I get excited about something and I move quickly into, let's go, let's do this. And I start pushing people and I start pushing myself, and I don't slow down. And so I have some patterns about that. But this feeling of excitement kind of fuels me to burn out. It fuels me to burn others out. It fuels me to do too many things. It also fuels me to lots of good things. But that's
is an interesting one, Josh. I think sometimes that I have a problem with that too, in a different way though. When, for example, when I feel excited, right, and I do talk to my friends or my colleagues about something that I'm excited about, but maybe they're not excited about that, right? What happens when there is that disconnect? And I think that's interesting. Or the opposite situation, right? Because emotions, they are universal, but every one of us perceive them in different moments, in different ways, and and how do we communicate them in an effective way?
Yes, I'm just thinking back in the old days when I used to go on airplanes, and you're sitting with somebody for, 8, 12, 15 hours, and they're like, oh, let me tell you all about my cats. That's amazing. I'm going to read my book now.
Yeah. But I love the way you presented, because when I think about the word struggle, I don't necessarily think about these emotions. I was going more towards anger, fear. So for me, and I know that, listen to what you're saying, Josh, I realize I can be an emotion that I have to, look more into, because I get excited and I want to do everything, as you guys know. So, anyway, I know. Yeah. So we might be
before the show, we showed that model, and feels like, let's have that in Spanish now.
Yeah. So they say I'm an expert. In Latin America, there's a saint that you pray to get work. It's San Lázaro. And some people in the network call me San Lázaro, because every time we talk, I create work for them, for me, for everyone. It's like, oh my God, So that might be something that I struggle with.
Well, for me, what this phase is showing up like, it's drained and vibrant. When I'm drained, I actually can't function well. I need my time. I need to recharge. When I'm vibrant, I'm in my most best element, and I can give more, share more, and be there more. And so these what came up now.
I'm
all
curious.
about, yeah.
I'm curious, when you think about drained or vibrant in the Plutchik model, what basic emotions do you think might be in one of those?
Vibrant. Joy?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Tells you life is going well, sparks creativity, connection, energy.
There's probably some anticipation too, and excitement about the future.
So
Yeah, anticipation. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was saying, like Tom was saying, that the anticipation is when it's related to joy. Actually, this what, at least for me, is more like a vibrant. It's more the combination.
And anticipation is so interesting, because when we combine anticipation with joy, it's one thing. When we combine anticipation with fear, it's something very different. But one of the things that's cool about this is, if you say, okay, well, if you think anticipation and joy might be in vibrant, then we go to the opposites. Sadness and surprise combined might be in what you're describing as drained. Is that right? Yeah. Because by looking at the opposites, you get an opposite perspective. It's not necessarily 100% clear, but it gives you interesting clues.
Yeah, and I think we've done a lot of research on that question of what is the most prevalent emotion in the workplace, and I don't know if that question was exactly leading to that, but that changed over time. When we did the pre the pandemic, it was frustration, I believe, was the biggest one, right? And what do you think it is now? I think I have an answer, but
I think it's anxiety.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what we saw in our most recent research, actually.
Yeah, which is also, I think, interesting when you connect it with loneliness and disconnection and uncertainty. It creates a very difficult, painful context for us to thrive.
Do you think there's a healthy continuum, like something that we can reassure people on, like, oh, well, I'm feeling this and this, and that emotion is not sustainable for your health or for making good decisions? So what is something that we can reassure them in terms of, okay, it's okay to feel apprehension, and it's okay to feel this? It's part of our common experience.
And I think that there's an abundant body of research now that says, when you do the opposite of that and you say, oh no, don't worry, it's okay, you actually intensify the feelings. And so naming it, and not, we say VET, right? Validate, explore, transform. If we have to start with validating and saying, whatever you're feeling, it's there for a reason. And there's value in it.
Right.
Well, that's a great closing thought, I would say, since we're run out of time. Also, I want to remind everyone that we have a video coming out about, not just about anxiety, but it's really what Phil was getting at right now, which is about how, how sometimes we feel anxious about being anxious, about having anxiety, and what can we do? How does that work? And if you're interested in that, stay tuned. We're gonna drop a new video about that next week, I believe. Yeah.
Every Friday we've been dropping a new video, right?
Every Friday. This week is gonna be another video on the Measuring Emotional Intelligence series. So if you watched the first one, it's gonna be a nice continuum to that. If you didn't watch that one yet, just go to our channel and take a look.
Well, it's been really delightful to get to chat with you here on the chat, all of you who are joining from all over the world, and Serene and Theo, really glad to get a chance to talk to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's great.
If this was helpful, would you please comment, like, share, and subscribe? The Emotional Intelligence Network is your community to grow and practice EQ. At 6 seconds, that means being smarter with feelings. And we're here to provide practical, proven EQ tools so workplaces, schools, and people can thrive everywhere in the world. Be sure to visit 6seconds.org to find the complete suite of resources, assessments, and programs. Thank you for watching.